Great, thank you, Kevin, and thank you to Marine Money for inviting us to be part of this panel today. So good afternoon, everyone. What an exciting industry we work in. I think every time I speak, I come to conferences, I think it's a great industry to work in. But boy, are we challenged. We continue to be challenged as an industry. It's not just the decarbonisation challenge leading to the reduction targets, but data, digital, we all talked about it before. One of the earlier panelists said, I have good days, and I have bad days. But it's a bad day, it's a bad day. I hope today's a good day, right? Hopefully, absolutely. So we see the geopolitical situation that we've talked about today. We're seeing innovation develop at a much faster pace. And I think as an industry, we've got better. I remember many years ago, those of you who are around in the dot-com boom, we brought some technology people in from Deutsche Bank. And this technology guy said, boy, this industry moves a dead slow ahead. But I think we're making progress. We know what the challenge is, but I think we need to move quicker. You'll have seen in COP28 in Dubai that there was a greater sense of urgency. And we're certainly seeing that now. We are a very resilient industry. Despite COVID, we came out better. The owners have seen the markets very buoyant. I think somebody said this morning, never have we experienced it where all the sectors are doing well. That's great news, isn't it? It's really good news. But despite this, we have these disruptions. Think and remember that in the general public, they don't think about shipping until something happens, whether it's good or it's bad. And then suddenly, we're in the spotlight. Good or bad. The ever-changing geopolitical positions, I've smiled over the last few days, watching the news feeds with Donald Trump and the speed he goes at and the way he does things. I think we're in for an interesting time ahead. We've seen the attacks in the Red Sea area. High number of vessels have been attacked. We've seen the Ukraine situation with the grain, piracy raising its ugly head again, and on a more frequent base, the sanctions and the grey fleet, and the impact that is having on the industry. I think there's other geopolitical situations we need to be aware of. The South China Sea, Taiwan. I've just come back from living in Singapore for 6 years, and there was definitely thinking of not if, when that will happen in Taiwan. And that could have huge ramifications for us. So shipping will continue the efforts, for absolutely. We have to work in a collaborative situation. But before I go into the panel, those of you who heard me speak before, I have to repeat one of my main messages. Attracting newer talent to our industry. The gentleman from Lloyd's Register touched on it just earlier in the last presentation. I put it on all of you in this room, it's all of our responsibility to attract new talent to our industry. What could be a better time? Decarbonisation, innovation, data, digital. So I task all of you attracting new talent to the industry. So let's just turn to the panel. Well, thank you, panel. I'm going to ask you all just one very quick, sweeping, general question, if that's okay first, and then we'll go down to some more specific ones. Antonia, are you more worried about geopolitics or the energy transition?
Big question. And I think geopolitics and energy transition together is very complex, but geopolitics undeniably drives decisions in energy. Yeah. A conflict has massive disruption on energy supply. That in turn will then drive the pace of energy transition. But energy transition is so important, right? We're looking at long-term sustainability, climate change. We need energy transition to happen, but that needs investment. It's not going to happen by itself.
Absolutely.
Public investment and private investment. And as you pointed out, Trump's administration has its own views on the energy transition, and already we've seen that they've pulled various subsidies for green projects. So watch the space there, because that's going to be interesting. But I want to just mention that Fuel EU, topic of the discussion, something that the EU has done well in terms of this regulation is that the penalties that are to be paid are to be put back into the industry and to assist to drive investment in low carbon fuels. So these penalties that are huge, and we've seen the numbers and the concerns around, how we're going to achieve compliance. These penalties should go back into the industry, and I hope that's what's meant to happen.
So you should, right? You
yeah. Well,
should.
we have to wait. We have to wait and see, right?
Absolutely.
We have to wait and see. But that's what the regulation says. That these penalties go back to the industry to assist drive this energy transition. But we wait and see.
Great. Thanks, Antonia. Armand.
Thanks,
Same
David.
question.
Yeah. So, good question. I worry about both. I think we need to address both. Maybe to nuance a bit, if you look at the timeline, initially you would think the energy transition that takes a lot of time, is a journey in and on itself, and you look towards 2050 and beyond. At the same time, shipping is very significant to the world of commerce and trade. In Rystad, we study a lot the logistics, the supply chain bottlenecks, and so forth. And of course, near term, maybe that oftentimes have a bigger impact on the world per se. But I think the bridge here is to look into doing both. And why do I say that? It's because we've already done it at the same time in parallel. Yeah. If you look to last year, already having a framework and a regulation in place for decarbonisation, we know we need to pay more than $2,000 per ton of conventional fuel in 2050. And we have other mechanisms in place as well. But we saw how the world turned to the LNG markets when we had some headwinds on the hydrogen economy. We've seen by tracking our data in Rystad, the real-time data for LNG bunkering, how that increased by 90% going into 2024. The order books are filled with LNG ships. Sure. So I think we've seen also progress on many fronts. Regulation are some technologies, some others. So yes, I think we can do both in parallel, and I think we need to do that.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Right, Vincent.
Yeah, thanks. So looking at this from the perspective of an energy company, actually we see a lot of uncertainties politically, economically, and then of course the energy transition coming in. But there's also a couple of things of which we can be quite certain of. I think the amount of energy the world needs will be growing, and the amount of energy that the maritime sector needs will be growing as well. Fortunately or unfortunately, oil and gas will be there for a long time, and they will play a critical role in this energy security. Again, both for the global industry, but also for the maritime industry. Shell believes actually LNG will have a very pivotal role to play in that, which for the maritime industry is partly a decarbonisation play. On the backdrop of this, we do see the need of our customers to decarbonize, but it needs to go in tandem. So regulators, financial institutions, suppliers of energy, customers of energy, all need to pull together to make that transition.
Some interesting comments made. So Eugene, what could be seen as a simple short question, we've seen lots of different views here. Over to you.
Yeah, I think that the outlook for the energy transition is arguably related to geopolitics, yes, and I think there's a lot of concern and growing uncertainty around what a Trump 2.0 presidency might mean for the energy transition. There, obviously, during the last 5 years, we've seen a growing level of pushback, also in Europe, from governments and from consumers developing against a more sort of intensifying level of the energy transition or a green economy. We've seen that. So in the short term, I think that uncertainty and nervousness around this will continue. However, longer term, if you look at the underlying development of every single transition solution, it all points to one direction. It will do exactly the same as what we've seen with every other disruptive technology in the past. That in the end, it will disrupt the incumbent. And so I think longer term, there is no uncertainty with us as to the power that transition solution will have. Over and above that, I think that one element which is important to point out is that everyone now focuses on the US, But at the same time, the feedback and the noises that we're getting from governments and from regions elsewhere is very similar and is simply saying we will stay the course. We will not change. In fact, some of the European politicians have actually doubled down and already come out and said, actually, if the US pulls back, we will do more. And so I think, long story short, in the short term, yes, there is uncertainty. But in the medium to long term, I think the incumbent industries will be under increasing pressure without a shadow of a doubt. So the energy transition, I think, is here to stay. And that ultimately is because climate change isn't going away. You know, we can stick our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist, but it does, and therefore the implications of it will continue to rise.
Great, thank you. An absolutely positive outlook. Thank you. That's great. I think you go to some individual questions. So, Obund, I'd like to throw a question at you, please. So, critically, what can we do now to help accelerate the availability of zero carbon ships? It's a buzzword, right? Zero carbon ships. So how can we move towards it with reducing the shipping's footprint? Slow steaming, retrofits, wind? Eugene and I were just having a little chat before, about wind, and yes, becoming more and more popular. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the return of the sales, you mean? It's,
yes, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of interesting, contracts coming up now. I guess some conventional methods have become more relevant. But if we start out with the current regulation that we have in place, I think it's important to look at, there's a lot of good incentives there that we can leverage and work with to move forward. Under the current Fuel EU, we know that we favor LNG until 2040. After that, you can start to look into biomethane and how that can become a market as well in the wake of that. And of course, the poolings that you can do on your fleet, you can incorporate a vessel or two, and then, on alternative fuels, and then maintain within compliance for the whole fleet. So a lot of interesting things there. And of course, these regulations, I think, will just be more enforced as we see maybe the IMO comes more to the playing field. Fuel agreements is something we turn to a lot. In Rystad Energy, we talk to the energy companies quite a bit. And these people, they see the shipping demand, the potential shipping demand being there, right? Then they talk about the dual engines, but that's not certain enough, right? So we need maybe some fuel agreements and some offtakes that we've seen, for example, Maersk put forward. That could give a clear signal for these guys to move to production. And the energy efficiency, as you touched upon, David, is basically also, goes hand in hand with fuel reduction cost all the time that alternative fuels are expensive. So yes, we can do a lot on the lubrication, the bulb, the whole, the wind, etc. And of course, the retrofits, as we will probably touch upon maybe a bit more in detail, is one concept that could work for some, depending on fleet, vessel, and age. At the very end, I want to kind of point out one interesting observation we did back in 2022. I think we saw how the EEXI regulation from IMO to reduce the emissions caused this slow steaming construct, right? Then you end up driving to Asia, Southeast Asia, but you have less supply, so it works if you have capacity enough, but we ended up getting too little volumes to Southeast Asia. So there was a gas to coal switch, so a net increase in emissions. So we need to look at this holistically. I think that's very, very important.
No, interesting, absolutely. At Bureau Veritas, we've done quite a few projects with owners on their existing ships about getting efficiencies, just by doing some basic stuff. I think some of the panels touched on it before as well. Some of those results have been quite amazing, and I would encourage, if other owners are not doing that, look at your existing stuff, work with someone who can understand it, and you'll gain efficiencies. It's really interesting. No, that's great, thank you. So Vincent, the fuels, we had a little chat before, right? And from what I've seen, we had LNG, and then ammonia came up, and then that waned, and then methanol came up, and now LNG is back on again, really. When we look at the balance of the order book, then the new fuels are heavily LNG, right? Hugely, hugely. A further vote of confidence, I think, last year to LNG. It provides carbon reduction benefits right now. Methane slip, somebody mentioned before, is being addressed. Biogas can provide further support. What will be the predominant fuel as you go forward? You know, you're working for a big oil major. You obviously look at different ones. What do you think the prominent fuel will be in the future?
Thanks for that question.
It's $1 million question.
Yeah. So it's never easy to look so far out into the future, of course. But let me give it a try. Let me start with some statistics today. You already mentioned LNG doing well, and actually, according to DNV, it's the fuel of choice, of alternative fuel of choice for 2024. With more than half of the alternative fueled vessels that's been new build ordered being LNG powered, 260 being ordered in 24, doubling numbers from the year before. And actually, if you look at the amount of ships that hit the water this year, it's 170. So it's 640 LNG powered ships in operation today, and that's going to double towards the end of the decade. Now, why are these numbers important? Actually, because these numbers signify that our customers see that for specific shipping routes where it makes economic and operational sense, LNG really is the fuel of choice. And why is that? I think it's for two reasons. One, it provides optionality to switch between LNG and fuel oil in a world which is volatile, which is uncertain, and then that option is worth something. On the other hand, it provides our customers with the option to decarbonize and blend in bio-LNG and synthetic LNG in the portions that they needed to meet their decarbonization targets. Shell has looked at all kinds of alternative fuels and actually found that both LNG and bio-LNG have the lowest cost of abatement. If you look at LNG, bio-LNG and synthetic LNG, they're all consisting of liquefied methane. And that's great because that actually means that you can use your existing LNG infrastructure for all those products, which means it's very fast to scale up bio-LNG, faster than any other thing. If you look at LNG, it can also make use of mass balancing in Europe. So the European gas grid is operated as one single mass balanced grid, including storage facilities, including liquefaction facilities. So that means if you have locally produced biomethane somewhere in France, you can actually put it into the gas grid and then take it out at a liquefaction terminal in Rotterdam without having the need to transport it, without having the need to physically bring it there. So that makes it really efficient. Looking at LNG, you can have, and we saw it in the previous presentation, with the right engine, you can have savings, enough 23% savings of CO2, and you can actually comply with FuelEU Maritime up until 2034. Then you can start blending in bio, blending in synthetic. If you look at the amount of biomass available, it's ample. If the regulations allow for different parts in the world and different jurisdictions to be counted in as well. So I think all in all, actually, we see that LNG is there to stay. And with bio-LNG and synthetic LNG, you can actually decarbonize to net zero for a long time. Maybe just two other things that you mentioned, biomethanol and ammonia. I think biomethanol, Shell's view is that, burning methanol doesn't make sense, has a way higher carbon footprint than fuel oil. Biomethanol, if you look at the current technology today, it's actually less, it's also made from biogas, and it's less efficient to make biomethanol than to make bio-LNG. And bio-LNG and the infrastructure network are there. Ammonia faces a couple of challenges, but the main one Shell sees is actually the toxicity risk and the harm it can do to both human and aquatic life. And the risk of leaks, incidents, also in densely populated areas is something that would need to be completely solved before Shell would actually consider that.
That's the big thing of ammonia, right? You know, it's toxic, it's corrosive, low burning point, but still people are looking at it. So it's going to be interesting to see how people can take that forward. Thank you, Vincent. So Eugene, we talk about sustainability, alternative fuels, but let's talk about sustainable shipping in general from your aspect. What do you see as some of the key challenges associated with the net zero solutions?
I think it sort of follows on from the points that I made earlier about some of the challenges that we are currently seeing. I think there's a different mix between some of the sustainability-related issues on a short-term basis versus the long-term, particularly for the shipping industry. I think short-term, we've obviously seen bond yields increase, and there's now a heightened sort of level of uncertainty around inflationary pressure that may actually be building. And that is starting in the US and potentially feeding into Europe as well. And the issue that of course, provides particularly long-duration project developers is the ability or a more challenged ability to raise capital. And so for us in the short term, that is one thing that we think might limit the growth potential for the sustainability world, whether it's related to the shipping industry or actually more broadly. So any long duration project where you see sort of cash flows really sort of coming through only longer term, that is something to be mindful of. I think longer term, there's a lot of focus, and I think we've heard it in various panels here as well, on the use of biofuel. And sort of from the top down, that makes perfect sense. However, if you start to look into what that actually means from a supply perspective, and particularly from a land use perspective or a waste generation or waste use perspective, then very quickly do you run into challenges around, well, will we have sufficient feedstock capability to generate the level of biofuel needed that supposedly gets us to a net zero world? And so I think that where we are currently looking at this world, we can certainly sympathize with what Shell is saying in terms of the role that LNG plays. This is not necessarily because it is, the lowest emitting fuel available, but it's simply that if you haven't got enough of the other stuff, well then, you're probably better off using LNG than some of the other fuels that currently exist. But the biofuel issue longer term is something that I think is a challenge that I haven't seen a lot of sources suggesting, well, these are the solutions to tackle that problem. I think longer term, one of the exciting areas that at least the panels that I've seen so far today haven't actually mentioned or talked about is the potential for nuclear to be used. There's been a meta mention on hydrogen and sort of a few other sources, but nuclear, small modular reactors, they're being transported on ships to be used elsewhere. We have nuclear submarines. Well, isn't nuclear a potential solution for ships in general? Again, longer term, maybe that is part of a net zero solution. But again, we're talking longer term. And again, finally, one that we may come back to in another question, actually. So I'm preempting this a little bit, but and this was mentioned in one of the other panels as well, that there is a need to retrofit ships and to recycle ships. But at the same time, if you work through the numbers, what that means versus the capacity that currently exists, again, you run into an issue here. So we haven't got enough yards to do it. We haven't got enough people to do it. So that needs to be solved as well. So I don't want to sort of get people too depressed here, but there are a few issues I think that the shipping industry needs to deal with in order to get to net zero.
Now, thanks, Eugene, and thanks for mentioning nuclear, right? I think, a year, 2 years ago, if you mentioned nuclear, it was the elephant in the room, right? We're talking about it more and more. Technology is there for absolute sure. The molten salt reactors are very safe. When I was in Singapore, we were working with the Australian Navy on the nuclear submarines. We were working in Indonesia about a floating nuclear system. It's there. You've just got a very different set of stakeholders to deal with. I don't think the people of Adelaide realised in the future they're going to have up to 8 nuclear facilities sitting in their port in Adelaide. There's a whole load of different stakeholders to look at. Great, Eugene, thank you. So, Antonio, we've just heard about the Fuel EU from my colleague at Lloyd's Register. How's the industry tackling it? And what are you seeing from the legal contract side? And what are the trends going forward?
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, certainly since it's coming to force on the 1st of Jan, there's been a massive influx of people getting to grips with Fuel EU. It is a really complex regulation, actually, and it is important. I think step one is understanding the regulation and recognising that it's not the same as the EU ETS. It's very different, and there are a number of differences, but fundamentally, it's important to note that under EU ETS, we had the implementing regulation, some of you may recall, which made it very clear that the registered ship owner was the party responsible for compliance. And then you could have mandates to shift that responsibility. You don't have that with Fuel EU. There are no mandates. There aren't going to be any mandates. The definition is that of the ISM code. It's the same as the ISM code. So you're looking at the DOC holder. And what that has meant is, certainly from a legal perspective, working with ship managers, charterers, owners, making sure that their contracts deal with, obviously, from a lawyer's perspective, I'm always worried about liabilities, but also basically who is doing what to ensure that we're complying with Fuel EU. And, BIMCO have produced a few clauses, very good clauses, I'd say. I was on the committee, so a bit of disclaimer there. But, these clauses are really useful for the industry as a starting point. But actually, what we do is we work with owners, large operators. How do you intend to comply with Fuel EU? What is the strategy here? Because there are so many different methods of compliance. Are you going to pool? Are you going to look to ensure that your charterers are using biofuel? Are you going to pay the penalty? Banking, borrowing? They're quite complex, but you need to decide as a company what is the strategy that you're going to adopt before you then look to your contracts, because what you don't want to be doing is saying, actually, I'm going to set up an internal pool. I've got an LNG vessel. That's going to make sure that I'm in compliance, certainly for the foreseeable, so I'm going to use that internal pool. You can't then, under your charter party, give the right to the charterer to instruct on pooling. So really, it's firstly working with clients, ensuring that they have a strategy, and then we implement that in the contracts. And that's at the ship management level. Also, sale and purchase. If you're looking to purchase a vessel, Fuel EU is really important, because you need to know that vessel's compliance balance. A new owner doesn't want to be taking over a vessel, which they then face a massive penalty for. So it comes into the industry in so many different areas, whether it's ship management, whether it's charter parties, whether it's sale and purchase, bunker supply agreements, people entering into long-term bunker supply agreements. Really important to ensure that the biofuel that you're getting is actually compliant with Fuel EU, because if it's not, you get no benefit. It's treated just as a fossil fuel. So understanding the regulation is super important to then agree a strategy as to how you're going to ensure compliance. Other trends that we've been seeing, wind. We've been working on some interesting wind cell projects. I'd say a lot of the work, if you think about the charter parties that you're now seeing, 10 years ago, they wouldn't have so many environmental clauses: CII, EU ETS, EEXI, Fuel EU. So the work stream, certainly from a legal perspective, has shifted to the greener side. Also, 2023, 2024 was a very busy year for the offshore wind side of things. So doing a lot of work with a huge demand for offshore wind installation vessels. So those are the trends that we've seen, but it remains to be seen where this is going. Certainly on the EU side, it is going to be decarbonise.
It's complex, right? Really complex. Are you finding that when you're talking to the owners, they will listen?
Yeah.
Take that advice on board?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people see this as a huge opportunity. Large operators see this as a huge opportunity. And so some really innovative ideas that are coming out, and we're, working with them to ensure that we can put it in place. And Fuel EU does actually give quite a lot of scope for some innovation with respect to pooling. Yeah. Okay.
We're drastically run out of time, so I'm just going to go around with one very quick question. Yes or no, please. Are we going to see a boom in retrofit?
A boom. I'd say it's more of a phased.
Phased, I like it. Yeah, great.
Small boom.
A small boom, okay.
I think you'll definitely see some energy improvements on the retrofit side.
Yeah, for sure.
We have to see one. I'm not sure whether we will, but we have to see one.
No, I absolutely agree. When you look at the new order book at the moment, it's full, right? Europe's full. The yards in China are full, but they're expanding their capacity. We know there's a fleet renewal that needs to be done, but there's just no capacity. So we've got challenges ahead. You know, from my aspect, we have 5 major pillars that we need to address together for our industry. Technology, policy with the regulator, of course, finance, what we've been talking about today, more and more the social aspects as we look at alternative fuels, and of course, we have to work in collaboration. So, I'm now 2 seconds over time. Panel, thank you for your input. I hope the audience found the discussions of interest. Thank you.